Our next presenter is no stranger to many of you, Dr. Mark Sobsey. Mark is a professor of environmental microbiology, Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering, School of Public Health, University of North Carolina. BS in Biology, MS in Health Sciences from the University of Pittsburgh, PhD of Environmental Health Services from the School of Public Health, University of California at Berkeley. Joined University of North Carolina in 1974. Has over 200 published documents on environmental health. An author, he's a consultant to World Health Organization, US EPA, Center for Disease Control, and others. Welcome back, Mark.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here again. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak before this group because the Rotarians and international aid have been so important in encouraging the kind of science that needs to be done to come up with the best solutions to the problems that you've heard about this morning. And I'm going to talk to you about the scientific aspects of, let me see if I can go back to the beginning. You're going to go back, okay. I want to talk to you this morning about some of the scientific aspects that in academic institutions and with our partners we're trying to address with regard to household water science. This is Rob's. So mine is, it's actually not a PowerPoint, it's the Adobe, the one on the right. There we go. And click on View to get the full screen, I guess. Yeah. So I was asked to provide a science update about sustainable solutions, and of course our focus here is on household water treatment, and we've been very concerned about the efficacy and sustainability of these various technologies. And there are critical questions, of course, that we need to address. First of all, do these things reduce microbes in water? Of course, we have concerns about certain chemicals as well, but microbes are responsible for a huge disease burden, and therefore these technologies have to be effective in reducing microbes in water. Do they reduce waterborne disease? Maybe if they reduce microbes, they'll also reduce waterborne disease, but often we want the documentation from epidemiological health impact studies that this is the case. And really, do people and communities take up these systems and use them? There's a whole sustainability issue here about which we know very little at this point. And are they affordable? And if they are affordable, to whom? Who's going to pay for this? Are people going to pay? If they're at the bottom of the pyramid, are these systems that they can be able to afford? Or are there other mechanisms by which somebody has to really fund or support these systems? What are the appropriate implementation, distribution, and marketing systems? And how can those systems become successful at large-scale coverage? Because so far, there's very little evidence that we've achieved that. And how can household water treatment, therefore, achieve large-scale coverage, become a mainstream part of what goes on to deliver safe water to people around the world, or have them get the access that we know is so important, and have this incorporated into policy, global policies of all the stakeholders involved. So here's the list again of some of the important household water technologies, and here we're looking at microbial reduction expressed in orders of magnitude. So a 1 order of magnitude reduction means a 90% reduction. 2 orders of magnitude is a 99% reduction, and so on. We don't have very many metrics for this to look to for guidance, but the US EPA says you should reduce bacteria by 6 orders of magnitude, viruses by 4, and protozoan parasites by 3. And what you see is that, yes, under ideal circumstances, any of these get close to those targets. But in the real world, which we consider to be baseline removal, this is in the hands of ordinary people, where conditions aren't optimized, where water quality varies, where it's difficult to manage these systems at the household level. We think the performance, when measured in the field or mimics a field condition, it's much lower. And in fact, the biosand filter on this basis, as an example, doesn't do very well. So does that mean we should abandon the biosand filter and choose something else? Well, not necessarily, because we have other evidence that biosand filters, as well as these other technologies on this list, are effective in reducing diarrheal disease. And anything that does reduce diarrheal disease deserves our attention, regardless of some of the limitations we see based on laboratory or field performance evaluation studies. Maybe we can improve the performance of these technologies. This is where the science comes in. So how can we make the BSF better? We can maybe improve or optimize the filter medium. Instead of using sand, maybe we can use oxides of iron and aluminum to enhance performance, especially for viruses. We've shown that if we can increase the residence time of the water in the filter medium, and that's what this graph shows over here, that we get greater microbial reduction with increased contact time between the microbes and the filter medium. And we can do that by increasing the ratio of the filter medium to the water. And therefore, if we can adjust the water dosing volume schedule in terms of volumes and dosing intervals, we can get better performance. Because what you see is that if you compare the concentration in the water coming out to the concentration going in, the best water is the water that sat in the filter overnight. So how can we modify these filters to make them perform better? There are ways to do it, and that's why the science has to move forward to try and improve the operation of these filters. It's possible, and we need to incorporate this eventually into practice. But first we have to do the studies to show that this really does work. A lot of you, of course, know that one of the big questions about the biosand filter, using it as an example, was that until recently there was no evidence from the field that it reduced diarrheal disease in a rigorous epidemiological study. So I gave this group some preliminary information about that last year. The story hasn't changed, and it's favorable. In our randomized controlled trial in the Dominican Republic in Bonao, where we did a standard study design of randomly selecting households that got filters and other households that didn't, looking at diarrheal disease, collecting drinking water samples, measuring the water quality, we were able to show that on average, diarrheal disease was reduced by about 40 to 45% in children under 5. Water quality was improved. Most of the impact was observed in the dry season, because in the wet season, the no-filter households, their water quality got better. And so the diarrheal disease difference in this rainy period was not as great. And nevertheless, controlling for that variable, you can show that the biosand filter data obtained in this study document high efficacy in reducing the risk of diarrheal disease. The paper that will describe this work is just now being submitted for publication and should be available, we hope, relatively soon. So this is a randomized controlled trial. It's an experiment. But what happens in the real world with respect, for example, to biosand filters? Do you get the same kind of performance? And how could we find out? Well, we did a post-implementation study of the biosand filter, and I think these kinds of studies are needed for all the household water treatment and storage systems. They're not done very often. It's less appealing to donors and implementers because you want to do new projects. Looking back when new things are moving forward is not always a very attractive thing to do. Sometimes the results can be sobering if you find shortcomings of the technologies and the systems being promoted. These studies are perceived as being expensive and challenging, although in our experience this has not been true. We think this is important for institutional learning. It's critical feedback. We want to make sure we don't invent the wheel. We think we need to advance current knowledge, identify challenges, successes, and failures so that we can correct deficiencies. And therefore, this is essential for making the best choices to provide safe water globally and discover what really works and actually what doesn't. So the things that aren't effective, we can move on. So we did an independent follow-up assessment of the biosand filters in Cambodia, one of the countries where they put these in relatively early on, going back to around the year 2000. And we were interested in sustainability on the basis of continued use of previously installed filters. What fraction of those were still being used even years later? And were they still, when used, providing good quality water based on, again, log reductions of E. coli? Did the water have low E. coli levels that WHO considers of low risk? And what was the health impact on diarrheal disease? And we could design a prospective cohort epidemiologic study to compare diarrhea prevalence in people who had filters already and match control households that didn't have filters. So that's the study that we carried out. This was the study design, and just to tell you briefly, we first did the cross-sectional study by randomly selecting households. There were two different implementation groups we looked at, and we did a cross-sectional survey of 336 households to find out what fraction of them were still using filters. We then selected some of these households into the longitudinal prospective cohort study, about 50 or so intervention households from one implementer, same number approximately from the other. We found match control households for both, and then we carried out our prospective cohort study. And what we found was that 87% of the households we surveyed were still using their filter. So very high sustained use of biosand filters, only 12.5% no longer using it. And some filters had been in use for up to 8 years. So this is encouraging. This is a technology that appears to be quite sustainable and for which people, once getting it, will continue to use it. We also found that water quality was improved, not astoundingly, but a 95% or a 1.3 log reduction of E. coli, although up to 4 log 10 was observed, especially if you sampled the water right out of the filter outlet. And 55% of the effluent water samples from the filter were below the 10 per 100 ml low risk level indicated by WHO. Turbidity of the water was also reduced. And importantly, over this 5-month period, diarrheal disease was lower in BSF households than in control households, average 44% reduction. This just shows, in statistical terms that maybe epidemiologists understand that this is a significant difference in terms of the protective effect, and that the effect was most pronounced in young children, which is a target group that we're so interested in trying to protect against diarrheal disease. So the summary of the principal findings here were that we had sustained usage. The filter improved microbial quality of water. It reduced diarrheal disease, especially for children. Recontamination of the filtered water is a challenge because there's no continued protection of the water once it comes out of the filter. And this means that we have to pay some attention to this problem because the risk could go back up again. What could we do? Maybe we should add another treatment barrier. Maybe we should add chlorine or do something else beyond just filtering. So what are the real issues with regard to our understanding of the sustainability of these interventions? And one of them, of course, is to what extent do these interventions reduce diarrheal disease? Well, they all do. So whether it's solar disinfection, free chlorine, coagulation, disinfection, pure and systems like that, ceramic candle filters, ceramic pot filters, biosand filters, they all reduce diarrheal disease. But what is the compliance of self-reported or measured use after the studies are over? Our data here are limited, but SOTUS, although relatively high compliance during the study, post-compliance is low as 9%. And in another study, they said, well, they found compliance anywhere from 20 to 80%. That's not so good. It needs to be higher. Free chlorine, 60 to 73% of households self-reported that they were using chlorine, but when you measured it in the water, only 30 to 40% had detectable free chlorine levels. So the evidence to date would suggest that chlorine in some of the implementation programs that have been employed is not that sustainable in terms of daily, consistent, sustained use over time. Coagulation, disinfection, use dropped off to very low levels, as low as 10% post-intervention. So this one, we think, is not highly sustainable based on the limited evidence available. Ceramic filters seem to have high sustainability rates, although these things can break. And that means that if the pot breaks or the candle breaks, you need a supply chain. Our use rate in Cambodia declined by 2% per month due to breakage. And therefore, if you don't have a replacement part, those households are going to be not using the filter. Biosand filters, as I've already said, greater than 85% post-implementation with good support. And with somewhat less support, not so good. So this again speaks to the importance of appropriate support at the intervention stage and reinforcement beyond. Otherwise, this may not be so sustainable either. Ooh, went too fast here. No, that's, okay. Let's click it one click at a time and get back to where we were. So we came up, just like Stu Hart had done earlier, we came up with our own scoring system for performance based on effectiveness criteria for the different technologies in terms of the quantity of water produced, the extent to which the technology treated water not only for microbial efficacy, but appearance of the water and other drivers of uptake, adaptability to waters of different quality, ease of use, the cost. This is sort of the cash cost to the user, whether you buy a filter or you have to buy bottles of chlorine, supply chain issues, and then an overall score. And our scoring system was 3 for best. It's sort of high, medium, and low. It's like 3 stars for hotels and restaurants. Best, middle, or worst. And according to these criteria, it turns out that the filtration technology scored the best in our judgment. Now, others can score these as well and make their own decisions. Chlorine was also quite high, but SODIS and the coagulation flocculation system were low. And this information, we hope, will become more widely available soon if the paper that describes this work gets accepted for publication. Some of our other aspects of sustainability and continued use that we wanted to look at that were factored into our decisions were this whole idea of sustainability as measured by, if you go back after the study is over, or you go out and look at places where implementations have been done, what's the continued use? For chlorine, we scored this as low to moderate. For the coagulant disinfection system, low. SODIS, low to moderate. But ceramic candle filters, high to moderate. Moderate where there's been breakage. And for biosand filters, high to moderate, although, again, depending upon the level of support, either on the front end or subsequently with any of these household water treatments. So we think we know quite a bit about how these systems can improve water quality by providing safe water at the home where people are using it. They can reduce diarrheal disease, an average of about 40% or so. But the long-term questions are, how are we going to get sustainable solutions? What are the limitations of the technologies? When are they appropriate? You've heard this from others already today. What are the key decision factors to drive the choice of appropriateness in terms of the technology? What's the best way to implement at scale? What's the marketing plan for this? All of you Rotarians are business people. What's the business plan for these filters? Do we have them? No, not really. And we need them. And not only that, but besides the economic drivers for our business plans, what are the behavioral drivers for uptake? Now we're in the realm of social sciences, where we've done, admittedly, a relatively poor job of trying to address this. On the other hand, people in the business world are very good at incorporating social and behavioral and educational components into their marketing strategies. And we need to look at what we can learn from those approaches. And can we build the evidence base for what technologies are most effective along with their implementation systems so that we can contribute to the Millennium Development Goals and achieving the target that we wish to achieve. So, what we've found out so far about uptake and sustainability is that you've got to sell these things. It fosters a sense of ownership. We have to make the technologies and their parts and replacements available, accessible, and affordable. Demand often exists or can be created. The financing aspect of it for production and implementation, we've got to look into. What are the models for that? And what about the educational aspects and how this is going to go about with end users? And then implement programs that promote uptake and effective use through appropriately designed software, the behavioral, social, educational side of it. Otherwise, without this behavior change in education, it won't happen at the level that we wish to achieve. We have to document performance in the lab and the field to identify and correct deficiencies and fill gaps. If we don't do the science, we won't know what works really and what doesn't work. We actually have to create synergy with this type of household water intervention with other water sanitation and hygiene interventions. This is not a standalone approach. It has to be integrated. And we have to keep improving, innovating, documenting performance, looking at our implementation programs, looking at our impacts and sustainability. So, there's still plenty left for us to do. Research and development, communication, advocacy, especially with alliances, large-scale production and distribution, the financing and marketing aspects, changing policies at institutional levels, using diplomacy and politics to achieve large-scale implementation, high coverage, mainstreaming, and sustainability. We have to do this soon. 2015 is around the corner. Therefore, WHO and UNICEF have partnered to create the International Decade for Action, and that means that we have to get on with the job now. So thank you for your attention.